Two women are buried in the rock of a cliff in the middle of the Sahara Desert. They have been there for 7,000 years. Their skin is still on their bones. And when scientists finally ran their DNA, the result came back as something that does not exist. Not sub-Saharan African, not European, not Middle Eastern, a branch of the human family tree that no one had ever seen before. The ghost people of the Green Sahara. Here is something that most people have never been told about the Sahara Desert. For most of human history, it wasn't a desert at all. Right now, if you pulled up Google Maps and looked at the Sahara, you'd see a vast, lifeless sea of orange and tan. Nearly 4 million square miles of burning rock and sand. One of the most lethal environments on Earth, a place where temperatures hit 130 degrees and rainfall can measure in single-digit millimeters per year. But roll back the clock to around 10,000 BCE, roughly 12,000 years ago, and in that same landscape looked nothing like that. Scientists call it the African humid period. Sometimes they call it the Green Sahara. And what it describes is one of the most dramatic environmental transformations in recorded Earth history during this era, which lasted from approximately 14,500 years ago all the way to around 5,000 years ago. The Sahara was alive, not just a little greener. We are talking full savannas, waving grasslands, rivers that ran for hundreds of miles, lakes so massive that one of them, in what is now Chad, was roughly the size of modern-day Germany. Scientists have found the fossilized bones of hippos, crocodiles, giraffes, and elephants in the middle of what is now hyper-arid desert. They found ancient fish hooks made of bone in places that haven't seen water in 4 millennia. The Sahara wasn't empty. It was full of people who hunted, people who fished, people who, by around 8,000 years ago, had figured out how to herd domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats, making them some of the earliest pastoralists in the world. And somewhere in this lush, green, forgotten world, nestled into the rocky cliffs of a mountain range in what is now southwestern Libya, a community of people made their home. They painted on the walls. They wove baskets. They carved figurines. They buried their dead with care. They built a life. And then, as the climate shifted and the rains vanished and the green world slowly turned to sand over the course of centuries, their world was swallowed. Their home became one of the most remote, inaccessible spots on the African continent, and they were forgotten for 7,000 years. In the early 2000s, an archaeological mission from Sapienza University of Rome began excavating a site in the Tadrart Mountains of southwestern Libya. Near the border with Algeria, the site is called Takarkori. It's a rock shelter, a natural cliff overhang that ancient people used as a kind of semi-permanent dwelling. From the mouth of this shelter 7,000 years ago, you would have looked out over a savanna dotted with small, shimmering lakes. Today you look out over endless, barren dunes. Between 2003 and 2006, archaeologists excavating Takarkori made a remarkable find. Buried within the rock floor of this shelter, they recovered the remains of approximately 15 individuals, mostly women, children, and teenagers. The burial pattern alone told researchers something significant. This was not a wandering band of nomads. This was a settled community, families, a home. But two of these individuals were extraordinary. Two of the women, both estimated to have been in their 40s when they died, around 5,000 BCE, were naturally mummified. The extreme dryness of the Saharan environment had preserved them in a way that almost never happens this far south. Not just bones, not just teeth, their skin was still intact, their ligaments, their soft tissue. Alongside them, archaeologists recovered stone tools, wooden implements, pottery shards, woven baskets, carved animal bone artifacts, and rock art that still decorated the shelter walls. These women had lived full lives, complex lives, and the site where they were buried had been home to human activity stretching back more than 10,000 years, from the earliest hunter-gatherer fishers all the way through to the pastoral herders of the Green Sahara's final centuries. Now, here's where the real story begins. DNA from ancient remains is notoriously difficult to extract. Heat destroys it. Humidity destroys it. The Sahara is famously one of the worst environments on Earth for genetic preservation. The dryness that mummified their bodies also degraded their DNA to near nothing. But science had other plans. Fast forward to 2025. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, one of the world's leading centers for ancient DNA science, had developed cutting-edge extraction and processing techniques capable of reading genetic material from even the most degraded, fragmentary ancient samples. The team, led by archaeogeneticist Nada Salam, set out to do something no one had done before: sequence full genomes from individuals who had lived in the Central Sahara during the African humid period. They chose the Takarkori, women. The scientists drilled into the mummy's teeth and leg bones, the two places where ancient DNA tends to survive best. They extracted what little genetic material remained. Then, using protocols so sensitive they can amplify fragments just dozens of base pairs long, they reconstructed whole genome sequences. In simple terms, they rebuilt the complete genetic blueprint of two people who died 7,000 years ago. Then they compared it to everything else. To 795 present-day genomes from across Africa, Europe, and Southwest Asia, to 117 ancient genomes from archaeological sites spanning thousands of years. And what came back stopped the researchers cold. The Takarkori women shared no meaningful genetic ancestry with sub-Saharan Africans to the south. They shared no meaningful genetic ancestry with Near Eastern or European populations to the north. They were not related to early farmers who had spread into North Africa from the Levant. They were not migrants who had trekked north from below the Sahara, which had long been the leading theory for how the Green Sahara got populated. Instead, these two women represented something scientists had only glimpsed as a ghost, a faint, theoretical echo in the DNA of some modern North Africans, a lineage that researchers knew might have existed because its traces seemed to surface in statistical models, but that had never ever been found in actual physical remains. It had a name in the scientific literature. Scientists called it a ghost population, a branch of the human family tree so isolated, so ancient, so completely cut off from the rest of the world that it had left almost no direct descendants. It had nearly vanished entirely, leaving only whisper-thin genetic traces in a handful of modern people living across North Africa today. Now, for the first time, scientists weren't looking at a ghost. They were looking at the ghost's face. The Max Planck Institute's official press release stated that this lineage had branched away from the ancestors of other modern humans, specifically the ancestors of sub-Saharan Africans, roughly 50,000 years ago. That is around the same time the first waves of modern Homo sapiens were beginning to leave Africa entirely, spreading outward toward the Middle East, Asia, and eventually Europe. While humanity was fracturing and spreading across the globe, this population went a different direction. They stayed, and they stayed isolated. Dr. Harold Ringbauer, population geneticist at the Max Planck Institute and co-author of the study, told Technology Networks. The ancient genomes revealed that they were part of a distinct, isolated, and previously unknown North African lineage. One of the most striking numbers in the entire study is this. When researchers analyzed the Neanderthal ancestry in the Takarkori genomes, they found only 0.15%. That figure is roughly 10 times lower than what you see in populations from outside Africa. It's a number that tells a deep story about a people who, while the rest of humanity was mixing and mingling and absorbing Neanderthal DNA through interbreeding in Eurasia, were sitting behind an invisible wall in the middle of a Green Sahara, genetically untouched. As Johannes Krauss, senior author and director at the Max Planck Institute, told BBC Science Focus, these samples come from some of the oldest mummies in the world, and Nada Salem put it plainly. It's a population that's separate from sub-Saharan Africa, but also distinct from people outside Africa today. Okay? So here is where the story gets even stranger. because this discovery didn't just tell us who these people were. It also demolished one of the most widely accepted theories in African prehistory. For decades, archaeologists had assumed one thing about the Green Sahara, that it was a highway. The thinking went like this. When the rains came and the Sahara turned green, it opened up a massive corridor connecting sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa and beyond. People from below the equatorial belt could migrate north. Herding practices, new technologies, cultural innovations, they could flow freely up and down this green corridor like traffic on a prehistoric interstate. That assumption is now in serious trouble, because if the Green Sahara was truly a migration highway between North and South Africa, these two women should carry genetic signatures from sub-Saharan populations. There should be evidence of gene flow, mixing, contact. There is essentially none. Instead, what the Takarkori DNA shows is that this population remained genetically isolated for tens of thousands of years, even while they were clearly in cultural contact with the outside world. And here's the thing that should make your brain hurt a little. These women were pastoralists. They herded goats and sheep. And here's the question that haunted researchers for years. Where did those herding practices come from? Because animal domestication didn't originate in the Sahara. It originated in the Fertile Crescent, modern Iraq, Syria, parts of Turkey, thousands of miles to the northeast. So how did these genetically isolated women end up with sheep and goats? The answer, the Takarkori DNA suggests, is one of the most fascinating in all of human prehistory. They learned, not from immigration, not from an invasion of Middle Eastern herders who came and replaced them. The Takarkori women's genomes show no Near Eastern ancestry. Instead, the evidence points to cultural diffusion, ideas spreading from people to people like a language or a recipe, without the people themselves moving. Somewhere, somehow, the knowledge of how to domesticate and herd animals passed into this isolated community. They adopted it. They built their lives around it. Their cattle, their sheep, their goats, learned from outsiders, practiced by a people who remained genetically invisible to those same outsiders. That is remarkable. And it rewrites what scientists thought they understood about how civilization spread across the ancient world. But there's one more piece that hasn't been resolved. And it's the one that population geneticist Eugenia D'Atanasio of Sapienza University of Rome, who was not involved in the research, put most honestly when she told Science magazine. It's surprising. I would have expected more gene flow across the Green Sahara. The pottery found at Takarkori resembles pottery made across North Africa, suggesting these people had some kind of contact with the wider world. They traded. They communicated. They borrowed ideas, but genetically, they kept to themselves. For tens of thousands of years, researchers still don't know exactly why. Was it geography? The mountains of the Tadrar Caucasus acting as a natural barrier? Was it choice? Was it disease? Was it something else entirely? The ghost population gave up its face, but it still hasn't given up all of its secrets. Here is what I want you to sit with for a second. Modern North Africans, people living in Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia today, still carry traces of this lineage in their DNA. It didn't fully disappear. It was absorbed over millennia of migration and mixing into the genetic fabric of the people who came later. In other words, buried somewhere in the genome of living people, real people, alive right now, are echoes of these two women, these ghost people, these inhabitants of a Sahara that no longer exists. That is not metaphor, that is biology. And what this discovery also tells us is something genuinely humbling. Our map of human history has enormous blank spaces. We have been studying ancient civilizations and ancient genetics for over a century, and we still encounter entirely unknown branches of the human family tree, not in some remote laboratory hypothesis, but in the bones of real women who raised goats, wove baskets, and buried their dead in a rock shelter overlooking a lake that vanished before recorded history began. The study, published in the journal Nature and led by Nada Salem of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, represents the first successful extraction of whole genomes from any individual who lived during the Green Sahara. It is by any measure a landmark in human genetics, and the Tadrart Akakis Mountains of southwestern Libya still hold more burials, more remains, more DNA waiting, buried under the sand for scientists to find the right tools to read it. There are more ghosts out there. We just haven't met them yet. Every week, we go deep on the discoveries that mainstream history classes never taught you. The science that rewrites textbooks. The stories buried under the sand, but sometimes literally. Subscribe to Fabulon Stories so you don't miss what's coming next, because we have stories in the pipeline that are going to make this one look like a warm-up, and leave a comment below. If you could run your DNA and find out which ancient lineage you descend from, would you want to know? I'll read every answer. This has been Fabulon Stories. The past is never as dead as we think. See you next time.